Will you all please join last show? And repeat the Nembutsu with me. Namo Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Buddha. Namandas, namandas, namandas. Good morning, everyone. Is everyone awake? Dharma school students, are you awake? No? Believe me, I have been there. You know, this was, again, I have to sometimes remind myself, right, that Buddhism teaches us that, impermanence, things always change. Time goes back and forth. And it's funny because we can't seem to decide whether we want to stay on Standard Time or Daylight Savings Time. And of course, there's some of us who want to keep, there's actually some people who apparently want to keep this routine of, going forward, or springing forward, falling back. And then, of course, there are people who want to stay just on one time, but no one can agree on which one. I remember back in my days, actually, during my time as a Dharma school student, I dreaded, because the previous weekend, right, they would warn us that, oh, guess what, everyone? Remember, next weekend is daylight savings time, so that means you're going to lose 1 hour of sleep, and you're going to set your clocks forward 1 hour. And I remember, complaining and whining in my seat, going, oh, man, I hate it when this happens. And I would even try to convince my father, who would be the one who would mostly take me to temple every weekend. I would say, Dad, look, we're losing 1 hour of sleep. Can we just skip church this one weekend, come on, Dad, we're losing 1 hour of sleep. And my dad would, who was an avid reader of Calvin and Hobbes, by the way, would always say Calvin's father's response was, it builds character, and so regardless of what the time change was, my father would drag me to church. Now, of course, I find it ironic that I became a priest, in the Honganji order, and if everyone had the logic that I did back when I was a Dharma school student, nobody would be here this weekend. So I thank you all for waking up 1 hour earlier and coming to temple. It's so wonderful to see you all, even though I'm certain everyone is a little bit tired and we are trying to adjust to this new normal of the Pacific Daylight Savings Time. But let's talk about the Buddha's teachings, right? The Dharma, right? We were in the theme of the three treasures this year, right? I talked about the Buddha, and now we're talking about the Dharma. And I'd like to review the Buddha's first teaching, right? Which is the Four Noble Truths, the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. The first truth is that there exists suffering in life. And oh my gosh, since today is the day of the start of daylight savings time, I can certainly understand that. The suffering of, there is suffering that exists in life. But the second truth is that there is a cause for this suffering, right? There is a reason for it. And that second truth is our own selfish desires, things not happening the way that we want them to, and all of our wants and desires kind of conflicting with each other, right? But the way that it would be described to me in Dharma school is greed, anger, and ignorance, right? The three poisons. So the second truth basically stems from when we suffer in this life, it stems from the three poisons, greed, anger, and ignorance. But the third truth, right, is that there actually is a cessation of this suffering. There actually is a stop to the suffering. This suffering will eventually come to an end. And the fourth truth, of course, is how we escape from that suffering, and that is the Eightfold Noble Path. Do we all remember what the Eightfold Path is? Viti sclem, right view, right thought, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. Okay, viti sclem, remember that. The Eightfold Path, right? But however, the reason why the Eightfold Path worked back in the Buddha's time was because the Buddha was there. We had Shakyamuni Buddha in person, right? We didn't, back in those days, right, Buddha didn't have Zoom. Although there are some sutras that state that the Buddha was able to be in two places at once. So like the Buddha was able to sort of give a lecture here at Vulture Peak, and then was able to go all the way to another kingdom to give that same lecture at the same time. How the Buddha did that, I'm not sure, but it was Shakyamuni Buddha. But the reason why the Eightfold Path worked was because the Buddha was actually there to explain it, and the Buddha was there to clarify the teachings and the various aspects of it. So, now that we no longer have the Buddha with us in person, and we just have secondhand accounts of the Buddha's teachings through the sutras, we must rely solely on the sutras and the commentaries that the masters have written on about these sutras. Okay, so this was, this is the, but what we have here is the Dharma or the teachings that was given to us by Shakyamuni Buddha. And one of those teachings, of course, was the teaching on the Pure Land. And Shinran's teaching, going back to Shinran, I like having visual aids. This is Shinran's teaching. Of course, this is just one of the Buddhist teachings, and as you can see, this is a lot smaller than this one is. But this book actually describes a lot of what's going on in this book. And this one comes from Shinran Shonin. But as thick as this book is, believe it or not, the message is very simple. The message is very clear. And that message is, just say the Nembutsu. Just say the Nembutsu. Just say Namo Amida Buddha, right? So, for the Dharma school students, you don't have to sit for many hours in meditation, although I'm certain you would like to do sleeping meditation at this time. You don't have to do 1,000 marathons around Mount Hiei, although maybe some of you who are athletes would like to try that. You don't have to do all these wonderful good deeds in your lifetime, although of course doing wonderful deeds and doing generous acts are very good and should be encouraged. All you need to do is say the Nembutsu. Shinran teaches us that saying the Nembutsu encompasses all of the meritorious and spiritual deeds that Amida Buddha did in their 10 kalpas of existence and their long, long practice. So when we say the Nembutsu, that benefit comes directly to us. So this is a teaching that was not only given by Shakyamuni Buddha, it's a teaching that was transmitted once more by Honen Shonin and then to Shinran Shonin. This is the teaching that is here for us, here and now. We are here today because we say the Nembutsu. We are saying Namo Amida Butsu because of Amida Buddha's great wisdom and compassion. And it's important for us to remember that wisdom and compassion is still working for our benefit. While Shakyamuni Buddha is no longer physically with us in this lifetime, we are still able to hear and recite Shakyamuni Buddha's words. When we chanted Sambutsuge today, we were repeating Shakyamuni Buddha's words. When we say Namo Amida Butsu, we are acknowledging the great wisdom and compassion that is Amida Buddha. And Shinran Shonin echoes this teaching to us today, even though Shinran has passed away over 760 years ago. It is important for us to remember that Shinran Shonin and Shakyamuni Buddha gave us this teaching today, and that is why we are gathered here. It is important to remember that the temples and the temples and our organization continues to this day because of the wonderful teachings that the Buddha and Shinran Shonin brought upon us. But as I will conclude this Dharma talk, please remember that impermanence and change will always come to us whether we like it or not. How long this day lasts, how long we're here at temple, all of this will change from time to time. But we are still able to say the Nembutsu. So for Dharma School students, I encourage you, because of these teachings, because of all of these wonderful messages, but with the clear and simple message of just say Namo Amida Butsu, you don't have to just say Namo Amida Butsu inside the temple. Namo Amida Butsu is not just for inside the temple. When you go off to college, when you leave home, when something wonderful and you learn something very auspicious at your universities or wherever you may be, remember that that knowledge came from elsewhere, came from outside of you, and was gifted to you. And that is when you put your hands together and say, Namo Amida Butsu. So I would like to thank you all for waking up early and taking time out of your busy schedules to come to temple today. In closing, will you please join me in Gassho? And repeat the Nembutsu with me. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 Will you all please join me in Gassho? The Buddha said to Ananda, Bhikshu Dharmakara, having spoken these verses, said to the Buddha, Lokeshvara Raja, in just this way, world-honored one, I have awakened the aspiration for supreme perfect enlightenment. May I ask you, the Buddha, to expound fully the Dharma for my sake. I will perform the practice in order to establish a Buddha land and adorned with countless and pure excellent qualities chosen from among Buddha lands. I wish to attain perfect enlightenment in this world quickly so that I can remove the roots of suffering and affliction in birth and death. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandats, namandats, namandats. Good morning, everyone. Are you all still with me? Everyone's still here with me, awake? That's wonderful. So the passage I read this morning from the larger sutra comes from after the time that Bodhisattva Dharmakara, who would eventually become Amida Buddha, after he recited both the Sambutsuge and then the 48 vows, and then finished with Jusege, okay? So, and all of those songs and promises that the Bodhisattva made to Lokeshvara Raja, who was the Buddha before Amida Buddha, was basically stating, I have awakened this aspiration to save all sentient beings. I have awakened the aspiration to save all beings from this world of samsara and suffering. This highlights what makes our Buddhist school part of the Mahayana Buddhist track, but part of the Mahayana Buddhist movement, is the Bodhisattva vows, the Bodhisattva aspiration to save all sentient beings. Normally, when we think of Buddha or Buddhism or Buddhist monks, we think of probably solitary monks or maybe in a small group, all meditating in the forest somewhere, and robes with shaved heads and, kind of detached from the world. Now, I will say, for the first part, that while we see those images, it's a false perception to think that even monks in like the Theravada tradition or ones who want to become arhats are detached from the world or kind of off in a monastery, in the middle of nowhere or in the mountains meditating for their own sake, right? That's actually not the real case. In actuality, those monks do also interact very much with the lay community, and there is a whole ritual that goes on with the lay community giving them food and them, giving lectures and teachings to the lay community as well. So, but also in our school of Buddhism, the Bodhisattva path means that there is a person who resolves to become a Buddha, but delays their enlightenment so that they may save all sentient beings. so that they may save everyone, not just themselves, not just me, but everybody. Okay, so this is what makes the Jodo Shinchu part of that Mahayana path, is that Amida Buddha saves all sentient beings from this realm of birth and death, from the realm of samsara. And this is the wonderful teaching that was gifted to us by Shakyamuni Buddha and clarified later by Masters Honen and Shinran. This is a story of inspiration. This is a story of Shakyamuni Buddha telling his disciples to awaken their aspiration to not just be born in Amida Buddha's Pure Land, but to also save all sentient beings from this realm of birth and death. The Dharma teaches us about the great resolve of Bodhisattva Dharmakara. But isn't this also kind of in line as well with the stories and the legends that we hear in our own history? For those of you who don't remember or don't know, my major in undergraduate was history, well, with an emphasis on Japanese history, but even in high school, history was one of my favorite subjects. History was one of my all-time favorite subjects. Lots of other people found it boring, but I personally found it very, very interesting and inspiring. And for those of you who say you don't like history, I'm certain there are people here in the congregation who like the musical Hamilton. Yes, you like the musical. You've heard Hamilton, and then I'm certain there are others who like Les Miserables. Right? That's one of my favorites. That actually it's about real times in our history. But of course, right? We hear these stories. And sometimes they get embellished along the way with little things here and there. For example, George Washington, right? Apparently he never cut down a cherry tree. Did you know that? Like there's that legend. Washington, the name of the state, right? George Washington, there's that whole, what's the moral of that story though, right? Or what was the whole point of that story, right? He chopped down the cherry tree and then went home and then his parents were like, hey, who chopped down this cherry tree, right? And George Washington, looked, calmly up at his parents and says, I cannot tell a lie. I'm the one who did it, right? That's the point of that story. The whole point but apparently, according to historians, that actually never happened. But the point of the story was to tell this fact, or was to paint Washington as this very honest figure, okay? And actually, when you go to Washington, D.C., George Washington himself is actually quite deified. If you go to the Capitol Rotunda inside and you look up into the ceiling, George Washington is there in the clouds with 13 angels surrounding him, representing what? The 13 original colonies. Yes, did this really happen? I don't think so, but it's a very beautiful picture. Now, I actually recently gave a lecture at the University of Washington, Tacoma about Pure Land Buddhism. And it was asked of me, when I told the story and the basic structure of Bodhisattva Dharmakara, do you take this story literally? Did this really happen? And I responded with, I'm somewhere a little bit in the middle. Okay? So, I'm somewhere a little bit in the middle. I myself resolved, or am basically stating about myself, that I am an unenlightened being. I am a person who is not enlightened. I have not achieved nirvana. I have the same wants and desires as everybody else in this room. And I can't reach the level of enlightenment that Shakyamuni Buddha did on my own. I must receive help from Amida Buddha. But at the same time, right, I also am I'm a firm believer in science. I believe that the earth is round, or that the earth is a sphere. I believe that, I do not believe that the earth is flat. I believe when the doctor tells me I should do something, I am inclined to believe what the doctor says is healthier for me. But I sometimes don't think that these things have to, clash with each other. Okay? I'm somewhere in the middle on this. And I believe that Shinran was as well. In traditional viewpoints of Pure Land Buddhism, After a person passes away, they are born in the Pure Land, and then they have to spend eons, long, long times, to become a fully enlightened being. That, of course, is a traditional understanding of what the Pure Land is. Remember, the Pure Land is not a heaven where you go to kind of be happy and free all the time. The Pure Land is a means to an end. It's a realm that is ripe for your enlightenment. Shinran, however, flipped this. He actually said that the resolve happens in this lifetime right now. Okay? The resolve happens in this lifetime right now, here and now. We have to ask ourselves this question all the time, right? Has our Shinjin been awakened? Or have we fully accepted the gift that Amida Buddha directs to us? We have to ask this question to ourselves now. If it is so, when we pass away, we are instantly born, we are instantly awakened, and then we instantly come back to this world. That's the difference that Shinran stated. Right? The original understanding is that it takes a long time in Amida Buddha's Pure Land for you to become a monk because you have to go through all that training. Whereas Shinran says, actually, all that resolve and that ideology can happen in this lifetime now. So when you are born in the Pure Land, it instantly takes place. I'm perfectly honest, I'm actually quite grateful to Shinran Shonin for clarifying this teaching of Master Honen. But again, this goes to show us, right? When we hear about stories of Master Shinran as well, right? Like, did this actually happen? And now there has even been debate as to whether or not Shinran was one person or two people, or if Shinran, like what we know about Shinran is shrouded in legend. Did he have one wife? Did he have two wives? Right? We as people seem to like to get caught up in the details of the story, right? Did Shakyamuni Buddha actually exist? Did Amida Buddha really create this Pure Land? And, as doctrinally speaking, as a priest, of course, I believe that Amida Buddha created the Pure Land purely for our sake. But I think if we constantly ask ourselves these questions, and not to say that and by the way, I'm not saying that don't ask questions, just believe what I say, right? I'm saying that you should actually, you're probably focusing on the wrong aspect of the story. What is the story really trying to get at? Those are the kinds of questions that we should be asking. It's fun to be archaeologists and go back to historical sites and dig and see if we can actually find proof of some of these stories that have been told. And if it happens, then wonderful, and maybe they can make an Indiana Jones movie about it. But in actuality, when we read these stories, we should try to read, in a sense, between the lines. Shinran talks about sort of he talks about the subtlety of the teachings as much as the face value of the teachings. So these are things that we should be asking ourselves when reading these books and when reading these translations of the sutras that we do. We all kind of sometimes just read the sutras, Sanbutsu-ge, Jusei-ge, and these are wonderful sutras to read. But sometimes I wonder how much we sort of look at the translation, and then when we look at the translation, we probably ask ourselves, I wonder what they're saying here. So this is, I think, the whole important message of the teachings themselves. Why, Bodhisattva Dharmakara came to this world. It's the whole point of it is the aspiration to save all sentient beings. That is the point. Not whether or not this actually happened in historical history, but that there exists this Dharma where we are the ones who benefit from it. The aspiration is the central point of the story. So with this in mind, I would like all of you to reflect on this as you continue waking up and trying to adjust to this time difference. And in closing, will you please join me in Gasho as I read from the larger sutra. The Buddha said to Ananda, Bhikshu Dharmakara, having spoken these verses, he said to the Buddha Lokeshvara Raja, in just this way, world-honored one, I have awakened the aspiration for supreme perfect enlightenment. May I ask you, the Buddha, to expound fully the Dharma for my sake. I will perform the practice in order to establish a Buddha land adorned with countless pure and excellent qualities, chosen from among Buddha lands. I wish to attain the perfect enlightenment in this world quickly, so that I can remove the roots of suffering and affliction in birth and death. Namo Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Buddha. Namandats, namandats, namandats.